as I normally do when I come to Las Fuentes, I have found that at least the residents really like to have something in their hand. They like to be able to take things back and think about it and analyze it and process it. And so I brought 50 packets. I apologize for that. If you did not receive one of the packets and you would like to receive one, please see me at the end of the presentation and I'll make sure that we get one to you. Obviously, we want to thank Las Fuentes. We want to thank the League. They are just, I think, the preeminent organization in Arizona for educating voters about a wide range of topics. I want to thank my esteemed colleagues on the panel, and I certainly want to thank you for giving up your Saturday morning to be here. If you're not already aware, this is a very complicated topic. We had 3 very different speakers who offered 3 very different perspectives. There were some things that were very much alike, and there were some things that were quite different. And I found myself saying, well, I agree with that point, and I agree with that point, and I agree with that point. So, for a majority, in my view, of what you've heard, all 3 speakers told you the facts and the truth. And I really have been asked this morning not to talk so much about Common Core, but to talk more about process, procedures, and some of the politics around this topic. You know, like any educational topic or any political topic, there are 3 things that can happen. Either we can leave it alone, not make any changes to it at all. We completely eliminate it and abandon it, and either not replace it or replace it. Or number 3, over time, we can modify it. And the reality is, one of those 3 things will happen with Common Core, like it happens with virtually every other political topic. So let me kind of explain what's in your packet, and then I'm going to be speaking from it. I don't expect you to follow me, but you'll certainly have plenty of opportunity to go back and review it. I have gotten into the habit of including the cover sheet, the ever-increasing burden on America's public schools, much of which you heard this morning. From Jamie Vollmer, excellent writer. Don't agree with him on everything, but he certainly makes some great points. But I graduated from high school in 1969, graduated from college in 1973, and from looking at this group, I'll bet you I'm right there with most of you. Maybe a little ahead, maybe a little behind. But folks, look on this chart at what we were doing in public schools in 1969 or 1973, and look at what happened in the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, and it's continuing. When I was in high school, our school had a very specific mission. Today, schools are supposed to be all things to all people, and therein is a big part of our problem. And we could talk at some length about why that might be. If you get back to your 2nd page or 3rd page, and those are copied front to back because we didn't want to cut down too many trees, as we've already said. What I would like to do is talk you through the process and procedures of making change politically in Arizona, as it applies specifically to education. This could apply to any educational topic. It wouldn't just have to be Common Core, but it certainly does apply to Common Core. I've asked this question, and those of you that heard me speak, you know I ask this question a lot. What does the United States Constitution say about education? The answer is one word: nothing. So if you've studied constitutional law as I have, you know that the founders only gave the federal government the authority they wanted it to have. They're all expressed in the Constitution. Congress has the power to, and they're delineated. The president has the authority to, and they're delineated. And constitutional scholars and Supreme Court have time after time told us that if it's not in that document, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. Well, we can argue the conservative liberal stance of that all you want, but ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you right now, education is not a federal issue. It was never intended to be a federal issue. It has always been intended to be a state issue. So the next item after the U.S. Constitution is the Arizona Constitution. I have copied for you in there Article 11, which specifically deals with education. I'll be happy to read it to you. It says, conduct and supervision of school systems. The general conduct and supervision of the public school system shall be vested in a state board of education. a state superintendent of public instruction, county school superintendents, and such governing boards for the state institutions as may be provided by law. So the Constitution is very clear that there are 4 levels with very separate and distinct powers and duties. You notice the governor's name's not there anyplace. The governor has a lot of indirect authority over schools because they propose budgets, they make appointments to the state board, they have the bully pulpit, they can drive political questions and issues, no doubt about it. But the governor does not have independent control over saying, this is what we're going to do in education. He can have a lot of influence, but he doesn't have the final say. And the reality is, in almost no situation does any one group or entity have the final say. Because in this country, as you know, we have separation of powers in 3 branches of government and in 5 levels of government, and here specifically in 4 levels of government. And the entire concept that each one of those levels has a specific power and duty that may be unique to themselves. And there are certain things that, as a county superintendent, I can do, and there's a whole bunch of things I have nothing to say about, because it's not in my powers and duties. So let's start with the very first item. Well, let me back up. Let's talk about the state legislature, because the state legislature obviously creates the powers and duties for each of those groups. The Arizona State Legislature tells me very specifically, you may do these things. If it's not on this list, you can't do it. The state legislature says, here are the things that the state superintendent can do. It's a pretty short list, ladies and gentlemen. And if it's not on that list, you can't do it. Local governing boards. Here are 2 different lists. Here's one thing that you must do. You shall do these things. Now, you can delegate them for the most part, but you're responsible for it. And then here's a list of permissive things, things that you may choose to do, but you may not. So the state legislature has great control over the powers and duties of all 4 of those entities. They also have the control of the purse. And they also have the ability to drive political arguments and discussions. So the governor and the legislature certainly have authority here, but there's another group that we haven't mentioned, and that's the courts. There's nothing in there about the courts. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to argue that for the last 20 years in the state of Arizona, and unless you and I do something to change it, probably into the foreseeable future, the courts in the state of Arizona and federal judges are going to be making our educational decisions for us. Just look at what we're dealing with right now, what the state legislature has in front of it. A judge, and ultimately probably a panel of judges, are going to make that decision. Not the governor, not the state legislature, not you and I. A panel of judges are going to make that decision. And we can go back through that list that Mr. Vollmer told us, and we look at how many of those things happen, not because of legislative action or executive action, but because of judicial action. So we need to be very conscious of what's happening in the judicial arena, because they're driving a lot of the major decisions that we have going on in Arizona right now. So let's then focus on the 4 entities that the Constitution of Arizona tells us should make our decisions for us. And it starts with the State Board of Education. It's an 11-member body. They include the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. So if she can find 5 other members to join with her, she can make a decision. But she can't make it by herself, because she's one of 11. She's not the chair, by the way, either. A county school superintendent. My colleague down in Yuma County, Tom Tyree, is currently representing the county superintendents, and he is the state board president. A state university president, a community college representative, 4 lay members, members of the community and of the state, just like you. A charter representative, a district superintendent, and 1 teacher. Those are the 11 people who have the ability, for the most part, to drive this decision and most educational decisions in the state of Arizona. These folks are appointed by the governor. They are confirmed by the Senate. And we can argue all day long whether that should be the case. That's the way the Constitution set it up. This governor that's going to take office next week has a third of those seats available to him to appoint within the first 6 months he's in office. So that's another one of those indirect powers that he certainly has. In year 2, there's another third of this group that are going to come up for appointment. So by the end of Doug Ducey's second term, or second year in office, he will have had an opportunity to appoint 2/3 of our State Board of Education. Not going to happen next week, but whatever change could easily happen within two years, because he's going to get to control to a large degree, with some help from the Senate, who those folks are that are going to be in those 11 seats. If you read the State Board powers and duties, which are in your packet, let me read a few to you. They're very clear. The State Board of Education shall delegate to the Superintendent of Public Instruction the execution of board policies and rules. Folks, the state superintendent doesn't make policies and rules. They execute policies and rules established by the state board. That's a huge technical point of law. The state superintendent doesn't have that authority. They execute what the state board tells them to execute. Now, the state legislature could change that. They wrote this document, but right now, that's the way it's set up. The state board shall prescribe a minimum course of study in our common schools, those are our K-8 schools, and in our high schools. Folks, that right there are the standards. Not only do they say at the high school level you have to have these courses, but that is where the standards come from. The state legislature has clearly given the state board the authority to create those standards. So the state legislature could change that if they wish to. The reality is the state legislature for the last 3 years has tried to make some changes, and they've not been successful. And I count noses at the legislature every day for a living. I know most of those folks pretty well, and I pretty much know where folks stand on particular issues. And for the most part, there's not a lot of question about where people stand in Common Core. Either, especially in the legislature, either you voted for it or you voted against it, or you've been very clear in public comments and written comments about where you stand. Folks, I got to tell you right now, especially in the Senate, they don't have the votes to make a big change. Just like they haven't had for the last 3 years. There's a group of Democrats and a relatively small group of Republicans who agree with those Democrats, and they've got 16 votes in the Senate. So that's the political reality within which the state legislatures operate. So now let's look at the powers and duties of the state superintendent. The superintendent of public instruction, there's only six items here. And then there are some financial things, which are all financial in nature. But I'm going to read number 5. They shall execute, under the direction of the State Board of Education, the policies which have been decided upon by the state board. So not only does the power and duties of the state board give them the ability to direct, the powers and duties of the state superintendent says you shall be directed by. So anybody that thinks that Diane Douglas next week is going to sign a document and Common Core is going to go away, I'm going to tell you that's not going to happen. And if she actually chooses to do that, I'll guarantee you, then some federal judge or some state judge someplace is going to make that decision, because it would violate her oath of office. It would also violate my oath of office, the governing board's oath of office, and the state board's oath of office. Just in case you've never heard it, let me recite our oath of office to you. It's pretty interesting what it says. I, Tim Carter, do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona, bearing true faith and allegiance to the same, defending them against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is the law in the state of Arizona, ladies and gentlemen. Whether I like Common Core or whether I hate Common Core, it doesn't really matter. My job is to enforce this document. The state superintendent's job is to enforce this document. The state board's job is to enforce this document. Now, it doesn't mean that we might not go out and try to advocate for change. But whatever the law is at a given time, all of those folks have to follow it. Because we took an oath to do exactly that. We owe that to you, the folks who voted for us and put us in office. If you look at the county school superintendent, you're going to find a lot of power there, but most of it's election, and most of it deals with finances. But there's only one section in there that really applies. It says, in collaboration with the Department of Education and other state agencies. I can't do it alone. I'm going to be collaborating with the State Department of Education and other state agencies, provide assistance to school districts and charter schools on the use of student data, staff development, curriculum alignment, and technology to improve student performance, and to assist schools in meeting yearly adequate progress goals which are defined by the criteria established by the State Board of Education. County superintendents have almost nothing to say about Common Core. Our obligation is to help districts and charters implement whatever it is. And let's go to local governing boards. And at least two of our previous speakers pointed this out. I think this is critically important. Local governing boards have a huge part to play. They have nothing to say about Common Core. I heard two governing board candidates this last year stand up in a public forum and say, if I'm elected, I'll do whatever I can to repeal Common Core. Well, as a citizen, okay. But as a board member, they don't get to ask that question, and they're not going to get to vote on it. Because it's not in this list of powers. It's not here anyplace. That's not a governing board function. What is a governing board function, which is critically important, is the curriculum and the instruction. The standards are what we have to teach, minimum. So the first thing that governing boards can do is they can add anything they want to those standards. It just can't be less. There's nothing that says they can't add more. In fact, they have statutory authority to do just that. So cursive was mentioned. If we want to add cursive, which is not in the standards, all the board has to do is vote to add it. The curriculum is how is it taught, the manner in which it's taught, who teaches it, what order it's taught in, what time frame it's taught in, what resources we have, what materials and books we have. That's all curriculum, and that's completely local control. We've got governing board members in the room from Chino Valley. I guarantee you, their curriculum is different than the one that Dr. Erickson deals with here in Prescott. I guarantee you, if you looked at Humboldt's, theirs would be different. If you look at little tiny Crown King, I guarantee you theirs is different. It's just the way it is, folks. Local control is alive and well in Arizona, and that's a good thing. But the standards are consistent throughout the state. How we implement the standards, how those things are done on a daily basis, that's all local control. So, in there someplace is the answer. I'm not here advocating for it. I'm not here advocating against it. There are parts of, as I said, in everybody's presentation this morning that I completely agree with. What I do know is that this debate needs to be resolved quickly. We need to decide as a state what's important to us that all of our students know and be able to do. If it's the Common Core, okay. If it's something completely different, okay. If we take the Common Core and massage it and modify it and add and subtract and have public hearings all over the state, okay. I'll be happy to host some, and I know Las Fuentes would as well. And then hopefully folks just like you will come and tell us what you think. But one of the first things you have to do, and I want you to be real honest, and I know you will be, how many of you in this room have actually read the Common Core standards for the state of Arizona? Please keep them up. I'm counting 5, and I would expect all of our panelists to have their hands up. I'm counting 5. So folks, go to the Arizona Department of Education website. They're all right there. Spend some time, read the standards. Decide for yourself whether they're good or bad. Go back and look at the history. You heard a very good, I think, historical analysis of the various views as to where they came from and all the politics behind it. See, I think we shouldn't be looking backwards. I think we need to be looking forward. There are going to be, in my view, there's going to be some changes There's too much controversy out there for it to be ignored. I can't tell you what is going to happen, but I can tell you the folks who have the power to make it happen. The governor has their role. The legislature certainly has their role. The state board's in the driver's seat based on what the current law tells us. And the state superintendent and the county superintendents and the local boards are going to do exactly what the legislature told us we have the authority to do. So on behalf of the panelists, thank you for being here. I'm assuming you still want to be able to take some questions.